Why is Ladakh not a state? So came India's linguistic battles, something that we witness even today. Economic viability is not just money, it basically means the capacity of a state to support itself. Considering that GST collections in Ladakh barely reach rupees 14 to 15 crore, but our system doesn't leave UTs behind just because they're small in population or overly dependent on the government. Ladakh is burning. Demand for statehood. We have all heard these bade headlines, and amidst all that noise, कुछ obvious सवाल आते हैं. Like, why is Ladakh not a state? Or why is Mizoram a state? And how are these states actually formed? You see, I had these questions myself, and if you are curious, stay with us to understand the formation of states and union territories that form the Union of States, that is Bharat. Let's start from the beginning. Independent India. At the time of independence, we were a makeup of 565 princely states and 17 provinces. The story of how they got integrated is for another day, because that was one Herculean task worth a Nobel. But today we'll restrict ourselves to the Indian states and union territories that make up the Union of India. So these 565 princely states and 17 provinces were grouped under 4 clusters, namely Cluster A, B, C and D. Simply put, these states were grouped based on administrative, political and historical factors which included their size, governance structure and relationship with the British government. Cluster A states were larger and already politically developed provinces with elected legislatures, and smaller princely states were grouped into 9 big units under Cluster B. Now Cluster C states remained under direct control, while Cluster D only had Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Why? Because it was excluded from the mainland and needed a special administrative status. Now that this is clear, we need to remember one thing. The boundaries of provinces and princely states and eventually countries were largely drawn by the British, without much regard for linguistic or cultural homogeneity, and so came India's linguistic battles, something that we witness even today. To understand this, let's fast forward to 1953, the year Andhra was formed from the northern Telugu-speaking districts of the Madras state. This is important because Andhra Pradesh was the first state to be formed on a linguistic line. This was after all the intense public protests and the death of Potti Sriramulu, a prominent figure who went on a hunger strike. And like wildfire, the linguistic demand for a separate state spread across India. And so the central government appointed the States Reorganization Commission of India the same year. This was a 3-member committee headed by Justice Fazal Ali. In 1956, as an outcome of the committee, the States Reorganization Act was passed, and alongside, the 7th Constitutional Amendment was passed simultaneously. But what did the 7th Amendment do? Well, remember those clusters we mentioned a while back? These clusters were now classified into either states or union territories under this amendment. All the cluster A and B states became states, while the cluster C and D states were now classified as union territories. Outcome: 14 states and 6 union territories in India came into effect. Mysore, for example, was a cluster B state, but several Kannada-speaking regions were previously divided across several states and princely territories. So on November 1st, 1956, the unified Mysore state was formed by combining regions from the Bombay state, Hyderabad state, Madras state, Coorg and the princely state of Mysore, all to be renamed as Karnataka in 1973. The state that I belong to. But this amendment and act wasn't an endgame. State formations took place after it. Like for example, Jharkhand, which was carved out of Bihar, and the last and recent so far, Telangana, carved out of Andhra Pradesh in 2014. But what makes a state a state? What are the parameters exactly? We've already told you about the 4 clusters of states that India had. So back then, size and administration were the popular parameters taken into consideration for states formation. Then came the States Reorganization Act of 1956, through which parameters such as linguistic demands also played a role. There are broadly few other key considerations too, like geography and administration, socio-culture and economic viability before a government gives statehood to a region or union territory. You see, a state needs to be geographically contiguous, that is, it cannot be scattered for strong, impactful administration. When Jharkhand was carved out of Bihar, notice how it formed cohesively from a portion of Bihar's area, not just scattered parts of it across the states. The aim was to ensure the new state was cohesive for effective governance and smooth development. On similar lines, Uttarakhand was carved out of northern Uttar Pradesh on November 9, 2000. The mountainous Garhwal and Kumaon regions faced administrative neglect due to their difficult terrain and distance from Lucknow, which later prompted demands for a separate, hill-focused administration. Then you have your socio-cultural parameters like cultural, linguistic, ethnic, tribal, or historical identity of a particular region. Like we mentioned, Andhra Pradesh was the first state formed on a linguistic basis, and while Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh on a more ethnic and tribal basis. अब सबसे crucial parameter की बात करें, the economic viability. States are or need to be self-reliant economically. Economic viability is not just money, it basically means the capacity of a state to support itself. A state should ideally possess adequate natural resources, industrial base, revenue generating capacity, and an economic structure that can support its administrative expenses, such as government officials and ancillary salaries, welfare measures, infrastructure, and developmental activities. All of this independently as planned or envisioned by the state government. This self-reliance of the state to sustain itself without being overly dependent on central government support is crucial for statehood and its success. Hope you are with us so far and clear enough on the journey of a region to state. Now let's come to the union territories. इसमें system थोड़ा different and slightly complicated है, but for now let's just cover the basics. First we'll tell you how UT status is granted, and then we'll go into why some UTs have a legislature while the others don't. So the Indian Parliament exercises its discretion in designating UTs, often guided by factors related to governance, strategic, culture, and administration. Let's break these down. Some areas are too far from the mainland or strategically sensitive to be governed as full states. They are placed in geographically sensitive regions critical for the entire nation's security. For example, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are located in the Indian Ocean and at the entrance of the Malacca Strait, a crucial maritime choke point through which about 30% of the world's traded goods pass annually. So by designating them as union territories, the government maintains tight control over military infrastructure, security operations, and foreign policy implications while manning the Indian Oceans without local political interference. Next, regions with unique cultural or historical identities that differ markedly from surrounding states may be designated as union territories to preserve their identity. Examples include Puducherry, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, and Daman and Diu. Certain territories also hold strategic administrative significance, such as Delhi. In fact, the Balakrishnan Committee's 1989 report recommended that Delhi must remain a union territory with a legislative assembly to ensure federal control over the national capital, as making Delhi a full state would limit the parliament's ability to legislate on national capital matters. And if you are paying attention to how we said states need to be economically viable, know that some regions may be the opposite of that, and that's why a UT status allows direct governance by the union government, often for smaller or financially weaker regions. This means higher financial dependence on the center. For example, Ladakh is a region that has scope for revenue generation from tourism, rare earth minerals, and renewable energy projects, but currently its major source of money comes from grants by the central government. Considering that GST collections in Ladakh barely reach rupees 14 to 15 crore, and it has almost nil taxpayer base since 97% of its population is a tribal population, and individuals belonging to ethnic community living and earning in tribal region are exempt from income tax. So you can only imagine what all it would take for the UT to become economically self-reliant. But for union territories, the story doesn't end here. After the center decides to grant the region UT status, the next obvious point comes with regard to UT with or without legislative powers. So when a union territory has no elected legislature, it is directly governed by administrators, that is lieutenant governors appointed by the president. So there is a limitation on local elected representatives' power, voice in governance, and more bureaucratic intervention. But in a few cases like Delhi, Puducherry, or Jammu and Kashmir, they have their own elected legislatures. The obvious question hereafter would be, when does a union territory get a legislature? This again can be understood through two broad categories. One, when there is a unique or historical context to the UT. Let's take the case of Puducherry. It was once 4 separate former French colonies called enclaves: Puducherry, Kairakkal, Mahe and Yanam for nearly 280 years. Being a French colony, it had its own distinct French laws, culture and administration that differed from neighbouring states. It already had a representative assembly in 1946 and this was converted to a legislative assembly in the 1960s. Hence, it had a legislative assembly once it was granted UT status. Secondly, UTs with more complex administrative needs, higher levels of urbanization and diverse economic activities often benefit from a local legislature that can frame laws and policies for their specific requirements. Once again, great example, Delhi. And yes, a UT with a legislature ideally needs to have some economic base or revenue generating capacity. Otherwise, how will it support the administrative costs of a legislature and a council of ministers, development and infrastructural projects, along with the salaries of all state employees, etc. But is sabke beech, what about UT's political representation in the parliament? Well, our system doesn't leave UTs behind just because they are small in population or overly dependent on the government. UTs with legislature have representatives in both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, whereas UTs without legislature have representatives in the Lok Sabha. And to keep it fair, Article 82 allows readjustment of seats after every census and delimitation. So Census 2027 will definitely be a game changer even for the union territories. But all this does not mean that a union territory can never become a state. Incorrect. In fact, due to Article 3 of the Constitution of India, the Indian Parliament holds the power to form new states, alter existing states, areas, boundaries and names, or unite states without the need for a constitutional amendment. This article also allows for union territories to almost metamorphosize into states upon fulfilling the above discussed parameters and achieving the kind of viability that statehood requires. You have Himachal Pradesh, Manipur, Mizoram, Tripura, etc. that were once union territories and eventually were given statehood. But remember, it does not mean that they were ready from the get-go. They needed and still need to some extent support from the center even as states. So when you look at India's map today, don't just see it as a collection of borders and names. It's a composition of history, geography, culture and constitutional vision. Every state and union territory has been shaped by unique political movements, cultural demands and strategic choices. India could have chosen to become something similar to the European Union, where a bunch of countries formed a union. Instead, Bharat and all its citizens chose to become a single union of various states and UTs. Hit like if you enjoyed this ride into statehood and all things UT.